Everyone's coming in. This is terrific. Welcome to everyone who can see us as we're all being moved into this space. This is our Faith in Action panel discussion. We are waiting still for one more person, but we are excited to be here and excited to have this conversation with each other and for everyone else to be able to participate. I am Reverend Peggy Clarke. I am Senior Minister at Community Church of New York, a co-sponsor of this conference. For those of you who are watching, you can see that there are comments over on the right side. Feel free to try and chat with us. I'll do my best to pay attention. We are going to start this morning with a reading and then some introductions. So, my dear panelists, maybe we can all just take a deep breath. It is good to be with all of you. Starting with a reading from Adrian Marie Brown. She writes, "Dear God is change. I believe it's making me aware of each moment, the occasion it is to be alive, the awe-striking power of creating the conditions for life versus committing to suffering. Today I will pray to you through my deeds, shaping you and letting myself be shaped, not because I am guilty or afraid, but because you exist, and I do, and for that I am so grateful. This gratitude attunes me to the mercurial shifting of each person I interact with today as we shape each other. Everything you touch, everything you change is God." I am a Unitarian Universalist minister, and we begin all of our holy and sacred work by lighting a chalice. And so I am lighting my chalice here for you all today. May it ignite hope in our lives and in our communities and in the world. Let's begin with introductions. I'm going to ask you all to unmute yourselves while we have this conversation, unless there's an echo, and then we'll selectively remute ourselves. Our intention for this conversation is that it is dynamic and that we are able to talk with each other. I think there is an echo, so we're going to have to keep everyone on mute. Yeah, there's just an echo, so we're just going to have to be nimble in our taking ourselves off of mute. So let's begin. Reverend Chris Long, would you be willing to just introduce yourself with your name, your location, your faith tradition?
A good day to you all. My name is Reverend Chris Long. I have the great fortune of being the assistant minister at Community Church New York City here in Manhattan. I'm deeply honored to be invited to be a part of CSS's vision for what might come about today.
Thank you. Venerable Ashen Vimala.
Hello, blessings, everyone. I'm Ashen Vimla. I'm an ordained Buddhist monk. I'm ordained in the Theravada tradition, but I consider myself non-sectarian. I'm based overseas in Southeast Asia, but I'm currently back in the U.S.
Thank you. Let's go to Reverend Mac Brandon.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Reverend Mac Brandon. I'm the pastor of the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Ridgewood, New Jersey. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. Reverend Carol Sissel. Reverend, yeah.
Good morning, all. It's a pleasure, just a pleasure to be with you this morning. I am a Unitarian Universalist minister. I serve one of our fellowships in State College, Pennsylvania, 300 hardy souls who are all voting, all voting. It's so good to be with you.
Good to see you. And Lukeman Tyler Wilcox.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah barakatuhu. My name is Lukeman Tyler Wilcox. I am a dervish of Sheikha Faria Fatima Jarahi, and I represent Islamic Sufism. My teacher is the first Western woman to receive the turban of a traditional Sufi order.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to begin this conversation with a quote or a little few sentences by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm hoping that it will start us talking. He writes, "There are thus three possibilities for action that the church can take vis-a-vis the state. First, questioning the state as to the legitimate state character of its actions, that is, making the state responsible for what it does. Second, is service to the victims of the state's actions. The church has an unconditional obligation toward the victims of any societal order, even if they do not belong to the Christian community. Let's work for the good of all. These are both ways in which the church in its freedom conducts itself in the interest of a free state. In times when the laws are changing, the church may under no circumstance neglect either of these duties. The third possibility is not just to bind up the wounds of the victims beneath the wheel, but to seize the wheel itself." And so, of course, Reverend Bonhoeffer was writing at a time of tremendous upheaval in Germany in the 30s. And we are facing our own tremendous upheaval and asking questions about the role of faith in this very public political world. And so I'm putting out to you, what do you think the role of religion is? In what ways should we be engaged? Bonhoeffer has given us these three ideas. I would love to hear what you all think. And you're going to have to be aggressive in the unmuting of yourselves. Go ahead, Carol.
So I find myself these days simplifying my beliefs. And I'm down to, at this point, I am my brother's and my sister's keeper. And if I continue to center on that, it just helps me move through this period of anxiety, of pain, of challenge. I do believe that faith rises to the top at this point. And whether that's faith in a particular denomination or have a particular system of beliefs isn't actually the crux. What matters is we continue to take care of ourselves and that we have something to believe in.
Over the past few months, ever since George Floyd, I was compelled to take advantage of technology and institute a number of community Zoom events. For the first 6, 7, 8 weeks, I did 2 a week with the community of Ridgewood. And they were well attended. We're now in our 23rd week, each week of doing community Zoom. And one of the things that has emerged is the level to which faith encompasses every aspect of our movement. I think that to piggyback on what the previous speaker said, I think that it is all-encompassing, and I think that us actually being, if you will, in the streets, in the technological streets, or whatever streets there are, allows us to actually offer that. There is this kind of disconnect, and we have seen this disconnect, personally speaking, over the last 4 years and well before that. And I think we have reached an apex of disconnect. So this is actually a a wonderful moment of connection because it finally comes back to the heart. It comes back to faith in all matters. And so we have this, I think, unusual moment, unusual window, an opportunity as faith leaders to show how those dots do connect.
I think, thank you, Reverend Clarke, for reminding us of those words written during that time. And I am deeply curious about the state and the impact of religious or spiritual or faith communities. It's harder for me to assess during the pandemic, but pre-pandemic, being on the streets in Oakland, California, being on the streets in Madison, Wisconsin, being there in Minnesota for the George Floyd, just the uprising of that memorial site that's a site of inspiration now. I'm deeply curious as to how religious and faith communities are positioned now, when I feel the challenge is we're being led by the activists. This is my feeling. And folks that are on the streets are yearning for, in vast numbers. I'm not talking about those who lean on the plow all the time. I'm talking about those who are burning out in large numbers, who yearn for someone to give them a valid religious response in the structure. So I feel deeply challenged by the reading that you offer, and knowing, I just wonder where our churches are in responding globally, right? The young folks and the activists, which is long been the case, have led. Well, in this moment, right? In this moment in particular, because it was different in the 60s when faith and religious leadership was more pronounced. I just feel that the reading that you shared asks us some deeper questions, and to really be honest about where are we in meeting the needs of the masses that are yearning for what I think Reverend spoke before me was asking about. Where are we, as spiritual religious leaders in responding to the needs of the people on the streets? And the purpose for this conference. I really want to sit with that.
Well, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, the quote that you read made me think of a famous statement by the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And he said that if you see an injustice, the best thing you can do is to change it with your hands. The next best thing you can do is to change it with your words. And at the very least, you have to resist it with your heart. It was, a very powerful Ramadan, this previous Ramadan, and every Ramadan we read through the entire Quran. And it's very clear, at least to me, that the principal sin, addressed in Islam is different forms of oppression. And one of the most repeated stories throughout the Quran is the story of Musa and Pharaoh, peace be upon Musa. And, it's God is with the oppressed, very clearly in the Quran. Slavery is addressed, hundreds of times. The freeing of slaves is one of the, highest good, one can do. And if we look at all the different forms, of both explicit and implicit slavery in our current society, and we see, how heavy the yoke, of different forms of oppression, particularly anti-black and, white supremacist oppression, in this country. I mean, I think it really is the most, important work that we can be doing as people of faith. And I think it's very important for especially younger people who might be particularly alienated from, monotheism to know that, we are with them, and that, and people that claim to be a part of these traditions should be with them. So yeah, I think it's really, really, really important and very urgent.
So certainly in the Abrahamic traditions, God chooses the side of the oppressed. I wonder what that looks like today on the streets. What does it look like for people of faith to try to dismantle systemic racism, to try to move us forward? And are we, Reverend Long was just suggesting that the activists are the ones who are taking the lead, whereas maybe in the 60s, people of faith were taking the lead. Are we today as people of faith in a leadership position, and really should we? Should we be, or should we be following those who are clearly way in front of us?
May I suggest that the site of angst is twofold. There's certainly the activists we see. We see that there is certainly questioning and leadership in a realm that has, for the first time, if you will, in decades, not been a role that's been in the hands of the church. However, there is another side of angst, and that is with those who profess religiosity. And we see that there is a great swath of this country who are, many people call them generally evangelicals, but, who profess religiosity. And at the same time, there's a disconnect with what I feel. There's a disconnect with some of the most important moral and ethical issues of our time. And at the same time, their profession is one that in their minds is genuine. So I feel that that's a real site of angst too. So we as leaders are balancing, are actually playing with many marbles, at the same time, because there's angst all around. We certainly see the movement in the streets, but there's a movement. If we're looking at the shaping of opinions and the shaping of minds as we are moving in the most critical, this is such a critical period these next few weeks. And it's been a critical period of divide. We are really, fulcrum leaders in terms of being way stations. If we're taking our role, we're like, dealing with all sorts of level of angst and how to, how to bring that down so it comes down to the matters of the heart and matters of the faith. And what does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to be faithful? Because certainly, as a mainline Protestant pastor, I'm talking to, folks who are marching, but I'm also talking to people who say, well, listen, I'm gonna deal with this guy because I'm against abortion and I'm against, it mind boggles. But we have to be those people who are the center of ethics. Okay, I'll shut up.
Well, I wonder if you could say more though about the disconnect, and how is it that we isn't this what religion does, right? We reconnect to our deepest selves, to our God, to each other. I wonder if you could say more about what that disconnect is.
So I think that what happens is, it's kind of the nature of ourselves and our it's the nature of our greed and our love of our minds to kind of pick and choose, to be selectively ethical, so selectively moral. And so there are certain things that we really beat the drum and say, listen, this is right and this is right. But then there's other things that and of course our great texts, our ancient texts, all speak to a holism that to be faithful is an all-encompassing matter, and that we apply it to everything that we see. And of course, that makes things uncomfortable. So in terms of connecting those dots and bringing to attention people the areas of disconnect, the areas where, you're really on the mountaintop with this issue, but what about this issue? And I think it's really incumbent upon us to be ever mindful of the ways in which we have blind spots, and to bring that gently and with love in front of people. So, because there's always going to be someone who slips through the cracks because of that selective process.
So the role for us is about making these connections. It almost sounds like it's about making people whole. I wonder, and the role for us is to inspire and to move. Is the role for us also to transform the system, or only the people? I'm throwing this out for everybody. What is the role in terms of the system?
I think the role for us, and I like that question, is it to transform the system, or is it to transform the people? I would switch those. If we don't transform people, we can't change the system. So people built the system. People empowered it to hurt other people as opposed to helping people. I do think we have to go for the people. I'm in the middle of this place where I feel like religion has been weaponized against liberals, against believers, against the faithful. And that's the conversation I am often in, is, well, if they say this is what God said we should do, and they say this is the person that should lead us, why should I engage in religion? Does that make sense to you all? It's like whatever is important, what is loving, what is kind, has been pulled out, and we're left with this sort of weaponization of faith. And that's the conversation I find myself having all the time, is that there still is something in faith for you. Just because we have other folks acting this way doesn't mean there isn't something left in the pie pan for you to glob onto. But we have to go for the people.
I agree.
We have to start with the people. We have to start with their hearts.
I agree. At risk of jumping in too much, I teach. This is my 27th year teaching as a tenured professor at Ramapo College, and I often engage the students, as I did yesterday, in a discussion about these matters. And they were, and I asked them about the debate, and a couple of the first people said it's all rigged, so I'm not going to vote. Well, we had to stop everything because of that. But one of the things that I told them is in this 23 weeks of engaging directly with the community, I said, you really can take over your community, sometimes we'll march because there's been a call to march, let's get on the bus and march. And we feel that we've done a good thing, and indeed we have in the eyes of the nation. But then we go back home, and then there's that moment after that's like, well, did anything really happen? But the fact of the matter is, up close and personal in our communities, we see face to face all of the problems, all of the issues, and metacognitively we see ourselves. So I really believe that yes, I think we have to change the people, and the way we do that is engage in our individual spheres of influence. I call it being aggressively loving. In our individual spheres, in our communities, wherever those pockets are, that all of the issues are there, right, if we talk long enough. And I think that really is, now, obviously, there's work to be done on every level. And I encourage that. But for my students who wanted to just opt out, I say that, if you get involved on a small scale, that there is work to be done. And then, so the latter two of of the statement, Reverend Clarke, I think are the things we service those who are hurting. But we change the system, but we change it within our arm length. And what happens is it engenders a resonating effect. And I think that if there are thousands and thousands and thousands of pockets of faith, that you and you and you and you, that we are all exercising this holism of the heart, that that will be the thing that changes. And God bless, of course, those people who decide, well, listen, I'm going to run for Senate. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change this stuff real quick. But I really think that it is a one-to-one matter.
The holism of the heart. I like that. Ashin Vimala, I wonder if you would like to jump in.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, this is such a delightful conversation. It's really a privilege to be here with everyone and with this community. I mean, when I sit here and I'm just so kind of refreshed in my heart listening to the way that these issues are being approached, and I found that it's so similar to what thinking has sort of arisen in my own heart, listening to everyone. So there's a great sense of camaraderie, spiritual camaraderie, listening to everyone and fellowship. I am. I've just, this has been a heavy issue on my heart these last years in my country about what to do and how to engage and how to support. And what I've seen, some of the sort of comments, directed towards kind of the weaponization of religion or the opportunistic nature with which scripture is being kind of applied in various cases. And so, how is it that we could get so fragmented from each other? How is it possible that there can be such dehumanization, such kind of a vulgar degradation of other human beings? How can that be tolerated by people of faith? How can that dialectic, exist? And so, I mean, I think that's one thing where we really can play a role as religious leaders is, what does it look like when critical thinking moves into the realm of faith and scripture? How do we bring this kind of deep intellect of this habit of analyzing to moral contemplation, to morality? What does it look like? Because I think the people in our communities are vulnerable to other people presenting this information to them. And so I think this is a space that we can support as religious leaders, how to really think through scripture and the intersection of politics. What does it look like when these two come together? And how can we support people in thinking for themselves, really thinking for themselves and not being vulnerable? Because in a way, when I come back to the issue of justice, what does justice mean? And that sense of being good, fundamentally, of being morally good, and I think all of us, all our religions, we agree, even though the paths are different, that the ultimate destination is what is the most healthy, the most good, the ultimate good for all of us is what we find at the end of the road, and but it's not easy, to be in this world. It's traumatic just being here, and it's traumatic trying to decide to make a difference in the world is also really traumatic. And I think in some ways, we're sort of like the spiritual first responders, with people. The deep surgery is up to, God, Allah, to the Buddha nature, but we're the ones on the scene. And, for things to change, we can't change alone. I mean, as somebody who's tried so hard to change myself over the years, and I think not done the best job, watched myself fail repeatedly, I see that really the huge transformation happens through, I can bring this level of awareness and connection to the spirit, but that change needs to happen as a part of a community. We need this ecosystem of community, this kind of ecosystem, as I call it. To develop these new habits, we need a habitat. We need a spiritual habitat. And as religious leaders, we can create that habitat for new habits to be cultivated, and for trauma to be held, and I think for dignity to be returned to those who've been violated. So I guess that's what came up just now. Thanks.
Well, of course, what occurs to me as a white person in conversations like this is that because I'm white and I'm raising a white child, I can hide in a lot of this. Right? I can sort of decide whether or not to even talk about it. I can live a life that is completely sheltered and feel unaffected, or even if I don't read the news, I can almost not even know. It seems like the religious imperative is to wake up to profound interconnection. It is to know that I do not exist entirely on my own, that I exist because we exist, and that we exist together, and that what I am called to do is to live outside of myself in a very public way, and to know myself in a system that, because of my location in the system works really well for me. The religious imperative is to stop thinking about me and how it works for me, and ask the question of how it works for us, and then to participate in I always talk about dismantling systems, but really it's also about creating systems, building systems that are equitable, building systems that are just, so that I am raising a family into a system that is whole instead of one that's fragmented, which is what we have now. And the fragmentation, it seems, has created tremendous violence and has generationally, right, for centuries now, created violence that benefits nobody.
And I applaud that courage. I mean, I applaud it when I see it. After George Floyd, when I saw the coalitions of people who were marching on Black Lives Matter, I had never seen anything like that, and I just thought it was a wonderful statement of courage, often. And I think that really this is a substantial question for religious leaders, because heretofore we have existed in, if you will, towers of faith. We've sort of been in our churches, and for all of those who seek a certain enlightenment, come to us, right? And we'll show you the way. But we're in a period where we have to go to the people. There's always, like there's this push and pull, this play of coming to and going out. And I think we're at a moment now where the conundrum for many religious leaders is, how do I go out? How do I go out of my comfort zone? Because I was sort of raised to kind of sit in the tower. And I see many people who are dealing when it coming to terms, especially those who've been in ministry for many years. How do I do the streets? I mean, it's really romantic. You say I'm in the streets, right? The people who have been doing it, like, oh yeah, I've been Reverend Long. He's marched, right? And there are folks who just don't have those street credentials, right? They've been in their office for the last 30 years, right? And all of a sudden, all the people are out there, and they're not coming in. How do I do that, right? It involves a real shifting of thought, and some of it's some real courage to say, I need to go out. What can I do? And everybody's not going to do it in the same way, right? Everyone is not going to do it, and it's okay. It's okay that it doesn't look like. Maybe I didn't do the march, but everybody can do something. But it's making that decision to leave this place, and there is a bringing up that must happen in our hearts. It's our soul journey. But for that to happen, we have to go to folks, right? And at this point, up to this point, it's like, well, come here. If you come for me Sunday, come Sunday, and I'll show you the light, right? But those days are now not here. Now these are the days that we got to go out there in some way. And so I think what's tantamount is for us to figure out, what is the some way for us But nevertheless, we have to be bold and courageous in doing it.
Yeah, and people are praying with their feet. We have to be praying with our feet out on the street with them. Reverend Chris Long.
Again, for me, I'm just forever grateful. And I think the challenge of this conference is really knowing when white supremacy culture has even infiltrated even our own Black bodies, Black and brown bodies. And, again, I'm just sitting here thinking, how do we inform the people that are out on the streets? They're living with all of our sacred, when Jesus was alive, he was on the streets, right? Like he was on the streets and sharing with the prostitute there that their, lives are of major worth. And the homeless person, right? I really appreciate, Reverend Brandon, your sort of really deconstructing the towers that have been built. And for me, how do we encourage that the people in the streets, that their narrative is holy, right? What you are doing is holy work, right? And bringing ourselves to them. And right, everybody on the streets is not leading, but they're out there and they need a place to say what you are doing. And I'm struggling with the courage, right, for doing the things that we all should be doing, with the notion of courage, right? And what does it look like? Miss Tamir Rice's mother, Samaria Rice, she is the epitome of living the love of Jesus, and she can't even get a play in a city called Cleveland to respect that her son has been murdered by the state. She is fighting to have a play center that's Afrocentric centered, right? With all of those Black people there, right? How is that possible? How are people not lifting up the voices of the mothers who've lost their kids? Breonna Taylor's boyfriend and mom, right? They should be leading our narratives and we should be bowing and washing their feet, right? And with the poverty that white folks are experiencing head over foot, and they think somebody in the White House is doing them a favor, we have lost our way in some instances as religious leaders, right? And if I'm listening to that side of the pill that you so beautifully acknowledged before about a different kind of, even within Black church, evangelical nature that doesn't see that the transgender person is whole and holy, our work is to affirm that your narrative person that's experiencing homeless is the very epitome of why we are a religious community. Looking at our sacred text and saying, yes, deconstruct it. Talk about how did the whiteness enter my institution of religion? And if it's centered in whiteness,
Amen.
I hear you.
So one of the challenges, I think, is wanting to make everyone feel good about themselves. One of the challenges for me in religious leadership is this sort of offering rest to people all the time when really they need to be on the street, or creating space for everyone to detach, to feel better. And in some way we say to recharge, but we're not necessarily putting them back out. We're just helping everyone feel comfortable. And I wonder if any of you have seen that or even experienced the impulse to help people just feel okay. And if that question isn't moving you, then I'm going to say it another way. Because one of the things I find with religious leaders is that we talk a lot about dismantling systems and moving things forward, but we also want everyone to be joyful and everyone to be happy, and we can lull people to sleep a little bit in that. I don't know if that's a challenge. Maybe it's just my thing, but maybe it's a challenge for some of you.
I think it's a challenge, and it's an expectation. So the idea that your minister is going to provide you with a place for restoration, for respite, to become whole again after being out in this world that is so hard, that is so broken. I carry that expectation that's been put on me, is to make people feel better and to say to them, well, if you're not out there marching, that's okay, but please write some postcards. So I feel like to manage the expectation, it's a and a but. And it's okay not to march, but you still have to do something. And that's challenging, is to continue to tell them they need to do something, to be the person that says, we're going to put a Black Lives Matter banner on this building now before the election because it's a statement that needs to be made, but to bring them along, not just holding them to feel good. To give them smaller things to do is often what's helpful, whether it's postcards, whether it's, can you put balloons on your house and let people know that you are a safe place. Like that idea of there is some piece of this for you to grab onto often helps my people. But it's hard. People want to feel better. And I know one of the reasons I became a minister was to carry the message and help them seek and find their place that lets them feel better, is to find their inner respite, is to find that community that's going to support them. And right now we need to say, well, get out of the supportive community and go in the road and do some stuff. And that's hard. I hear you, Peggy. It's hard.
I have this poem here by Lucille Clifton. I'm going to read it for us. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come, celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. One of the roles I see for religious leaders is that celebration, is naming that, is naming something has tried to kill me and has failed, and we are here to celebrate that. Which I think is different from the impulse to make people feel better. And I agree with you, Carol, around the expectation of that. And that may only be for women, for female identified religious leaders, that we are part of the expectation is we are here to comfort and to make everyone, that I'm certainly the mama in my church. But at the same time, that we need, that there's more, that this is bigger than that, more powerful than that, more profound than that.
So to, oh boy, I just lost the.
You're here.
You can hear? Okay, yeah. I can't see you. To live the diverse life, to live a whole life is all of that, right? So in the midst of, right, to get to be colloquial, in the midst of trials and tribulations, right, we still have hope and we still celebrate. And of course, it's the unique mantle of faith leaders that, certainly in my tradition, that we're not just celebrating ourselves, and therein lies the hope, right? So in the midst of this calamitous moment, whatever the Exodus moment is, whatever the subject, I mean, it can change day by day. It can be a personal one. It can be a societal one. Whatever this calamitous moment, it is still a moment of hope, and still a moment of celebration. How do we have all those things in one day? Well, think about your day. Think about your day. In the middle of your day, there's some tragedies. Oh, I cut my finger. That was a tragedy. But at the same time, I see, aren't these flowers lovely, right? It's something as small as understanding our lives. Our lives are this, this petri dish of hope and tragedy. at the same time. And so as a faith leader, we have this unique opportunity to bring that understanding, because, when we are full of a sense of ourselves and full in our greed, then when things are down, they are all the way down. What are we ever going to do about this situation? Right? Well, how are we going to ever figure this thing out? Well, there is hope, and that hope lies outside of our understanding and with our understanding. And so I think, in terms of my sermonic series, and I haven't taken a week off. Tomorrow I'm not preaching. I'm so happy. I have not taken a Sunday off in a year. Right? So it's been 50 some straight weeks. And there's a curve, and you have to know and do prayer and understanding your people. There are some moments that you just have to bring them into a place of restoration and a place of rest. Be still and know that I'm God. Be still and and celebrate. And of course the text speaks to that. There are moments of celebration, and there are moments of rest, and there are moments of digging in, and moments of going to war with whatever is righteous. So yes, I believe wholeheartedly that there is a place of celebration and a place of rest, and we have to integrate that in and be very mindful of what people will need. And I think that is a nature of our humanism. There you go.
Tyler, I wonder if you want to speak to the question of hope in your own tradition. Where do you find that hope?
Well, and this is speaking to a lot of what people were just talking about. I'm in, the more mystical sort of center stream of Islam. And it's largely practice-based. We have our 5 daily prayers, which have been likened to, if a man lives by a river and washes himself in the river 5 times a day, he's not going to be dirty. So we're constantly refreshing ourselves through the ritual prayer, and we're constantly, in every prayer, we recite the Fatiha, which is the, the opening of the Quran. And, the previous, I'm not a leader, I'm a follower, I'm a dervish, but one of the teachers of my teacher was a man named Sheikh Noor, who participated in all of the major traditions, but only taught in Islam. He became a sheikh in Islam, and they had a wonderful teacher who was a very rooted, Ottoman, Sufi master who came to the West to give the West, this very deeply rooted but very mystical tradition. And where we find hope is, the process of Sufism, which some people say means softening, is the softening of the heart. And it says in the Quran that truly in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. And I think that one of the ways that we can engage, most of my friends are in, extreme, far left communities. These are people in the streets. I've been in the streets, and there's a real sense of, especially after postmodernism, there not being a grand narrative, and people are having a really hard time telling what's real. Reverend Brandon was talking about his students believing it's all rigged and you don't vote. I hear that all the time, from the people who are very far left. And there has become, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that through, the purification of the heart, through the clearing of the mind, through, constantly recentering on, what is, our deepest, our deepest desire, or our deepest, values as a human. We can reach that sense of reality. One of the most beautiful names of God is Al-Haq, the real. So if we can find a way to connect to people who, are really struggling to find hope, are really struggling to, sort out. We're also living through this incredible time where we're just constantly barraged with bad information all the time, and various levels of bad information. And discernment is very difficult for young people, who are being constantly bombarded with all of this conflicting information. And I think that, showing people, I just have to keep bringing it back to my own tradition. But in the Quran, it's organized, longest surahs are first, and then you get to the shorter surahs. But the first two longer surahs are largely situated in sort of straightening out a lot of the misconceptions, that have grown as, the various communities develop chosen people complexes. You could even say they white suprematized. I mean, this happens in Islam, like you have the prophet who is not white. I mean, you don't depict the prophet, but you have a lot of his Sahaba, depicted as like, white people or Arab people, and in many cases, I mean, Adam means, dark brown, means brown, I mean, in Islam, Adam is a prophet, and that's we're all the children of Adam. So, there is no anti-blackness in Islam, but Islam has developed its own anti-blackness. And if you can somehow, give to young people this sense of reality, this sense of, this sort of constant struggle between the oppressor, between Pharaoh and Musa, and saying that, yes, we are the minority. Maybe we're not the religious voices that you hear the loudest, but we've always been here. And I think that's very important. Like, and also saying that here are these practices that can help you. They can help you get to know yourself, help you to find your center, help you find, a way of discerning what is true, what is false. I think that's extremely, extremely important. And that's what I'm someone who came late to the path, after growing up in a crazy evangelical household. It's what it's given me. It's given me an ability to discern, and an ability to kind of put it all into perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We are coming to the end, and before we end, I want to offer people who are watching the opportunity to put something in the comments. I see a few people have, but if you have questions that you would like to ask someone, this is a good chance. And I'm going to jump over to Ashin Vimala and ask you about hope, and where is it that you find hope in your tradition for this work?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I've just found my mind circling around what's just been shared in this moment, thinking about, that celebration that you were discussing, making that space for that, and also, where do we comfort people? And, what kept coming up in my mind in this moment was this sense of the kind of the two sides of the same coin of celebration and grief. There's such grief in all of this, and that grief is, I think, inconsolable as an individual, and that's a role as a spiritual community that we can play, I think, is to, are we offering comfort, or is it that we're making space to console this inconsolable grief? I think that's so important in this world. To my Sufi friend, I was thinking in this moment about, some lines from the Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and, thinking, remembering the phrase like that your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and that the deeper the well of your sorrows, the more filled it can be with tears of joy. And then the flute that now plays sweet music was once carved by sharp knives. And so, I think one of the things that I think I love about the Buddha, was that he was just such a realist in some ways, and that, the encouragement was to see things as they are, to be in this moment in a way that makes learning possible. Awakening, I think, is just a really sexy word for learning. In contact with the moment so deeply, to be embodied, fully here, so that learning is possible, so that we can feel what it's like to be in this world and to see the suffering of ourselves and other people. And I think that by being deeply present to that, hope arises by being in contact with the moment as it is, on the far side or the near far side of sorrow, of seeing things as they are. I think whenever anyone faces the truth of the moment, the whole world relaxes a little bit. And I think hope is only possible out of reality, out of facing things as they are. Otherwise, it's just a kind of a fool's errand. True hope is very much grounded in the truth of what's happening. And I think, I wouldn't be a good monk without putting in a plug for, presence in this moment. And, I think that there is a kind of a relief with every breath. I think, we're only one breath away from a feeling of peace, from being on the road to hope. It's just like a subway train. There's one coming along every second. And so even if we're so deeply disturbed in this moment, we can always hitch a ride on the next breath. And it's there for us to help us come into this moment. And I think this moment is where the wisdom to know the difference is. And this moment is the only place where we'll find God. God is in this present moment. God is now or nowhere. And it's not possible if we want to connect with God, we have to be here. So, I guess that would be my response to hope. Thank you and blessings.
That was beautiful. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I also want to give the last 3 participants a chance to speak to this question of hope. So I'm just going to ask you to be brief. Reverend Brandon, would you like to go first? Where do you find hope? You're on mute. You're muted.
It's ubiquitous, and I think I'm going to run with everything you just said, sir. And it is in the next breath. I love it, and it's in this breath. And so it is ubiquitous, and so at the same time, again, that we are presenting the truth. The whole of the civil rights movement has been a recognition of the truth, and yet in the midst of that, hope. Even looking beyond and saying, we believe in this thing that's going to come. We don't see it, but we have hope because we have a hope in God, and God is with us now. And so we take that hope into an uncertain but certain future.
Thank you. Reverend Carol.
I think hope is in the next breath. I love that. I'm going to take that from this conversation. And I find hope in being really present in one-to-one conversations, in interactions with people that I've never met before, but opening the space for that conversation to take place. And I find hope in the ancestors and in the elderly. One of the best conversations I've had recently was with my dad, who'll be 93 next month. And while a bunch of what he had to say was, this too shall pass, the republic will stand, we've been through world wars, just looking at his face and realizing it did pass, just being in the presence of someone who's lived through these ultimately trying sort of times was extremely helpful. And that filled me with hope. That idea that we have these people among us who carry the resilience of time, and we can look to them right now, even if it's just to sit and hold their hand. I find that gives me hope.
Thank you. And Reverend Chris.
This is a song from the Black church tradition. Can't plow straight if you're looking back. Keep your hands on the plow. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Keep your hands on the plow and hold on.
You always make me cry with that singing, right? And so I am very grateful to all of you for participating in this conversation. We started by lighting our chalice, and now I will send it out into the world. Thank you all so much for being part of this. Goodbye.